Well, as we know, fundraising is essential to nonprofit sustainability. But what happens to philanthropy and funding during a crisis such as we're having? So today, our guest experts will help us explore how small and mid-sized nonprofits can relevantly connect to their communities, donors, and leadership to address community challenges and to stay prosperous during these times. We have two experts with us today. First, Karen Gall-Mills, and Karen is visiting clinical associate professor at Indiana University's O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. And then Bill Barnes, president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Madison and Jefferson County. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Karen. Karen, welcome.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Paige. Hello, everyone. I hope you're well. I hope your families are well. I hope you stay well. This has been a challenging time for all of us, but I'm delighted to have a chance to chat with you this afternoon. Just by way of a little bit of background, I come to my work as a teacher from being a practitioner, from running small to mid-sized arts organizations and government and philanthropic organizations. So I'm hopefully going to marry some of the ivory tower with also what I know it takes to do the work on the ground. All of you who are listening, I know, are doing really important work in your communities, and I'm sure it's a little bit of a scary time. So let's see if we can't conquer some of that fear with some facts and give you some things to work through. I'm going to lay out a couple of principles based on my experience and my study about what I think is necessary now for successful fundraising, and then I'm delighted to be able to turn it over to Bill to talk more about the context through his work at the Community Foundation. So I'm going to share my screen, assuming that the technology gods are with us today. And it looks like they are. Hooray for technology. All right, so I imagine for some of you or many of you, there's a little bit of this right now, right? Like, oh my goodness, we are being struck by a hurricane. What do we do now, right? And this is a unique moment for so many of us. Unlike the challenges of the recent past, many of you were probably in your roles during the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. Some of you were in your roles on September 11th. I was myself. But unlike those times, this is a moment where those who work in the arts are actually not permitted to do that which the arts can do better than anybody, which is gather people together. And so what do we do? I'm using this hurricane analogy because I think that we've seen, like, there's this storm coming and we knew it was coming and we had to hunker down. After a hurricane, at some point you emerge to sort of view the world around you and see what's changed and see what you do differently. And though our return to the world may be a little bit more slow motion right now than any of us would even like, that emerging phase, that new world that we step into, may still not permit us to gather in person for a bit. You've probably seen the news from the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, who has said that they are not coming back to live performances until March of 2021, right? And that's scary, and that's a huge challenge for all of us. So let's acknowledge, first of all, that this is like a hurricane. It is serious and scary. There are lots of unknowns, including unknowns for our donors, who in some cases feel less wealthy as the stock market has bounced around, certainly. And unknowns for those of us who depend on our donors to help us move forward. There's that little feeling inside that says, oh, should I even ask for money right now? But you know, if you don't ask, you may not survive. So let's talk about some principles that will help us wrap our minds around this. And as I said before, fight sort of fear with fact and think through what we actually can do now to ensure that the work that we're doing in communities continues in the best possible way. And I want to start by remembering one thing that I think is really important. And this is from Eugene Temple, who was the founder of what's now the Lilly School of Philanthropy here at Indiana University. And he talks about fundraising as the gentle art of teaching the joy of giving. Robert Payton from there also talked about philanthropy as voluntary action for the common good. And when you put those two phrases together, hopefully you are reminded that there's an imperative for all of us. Donors want to give their money to things that matter to them. We run organizations that allow us to think differently about our world, and putting those things together becomes really important. So the first principle that I'm going to stick with, based on Gene Temple's wise words, is a principle about back to basics, right? The first thing we got to do at this moment is we need to let our core mission and purpose guide us. We need to be asking ourselves questions of essence. What do we do? Why do we do what we do? What's the core of what we do? This is not about reading your mission statement out loud. This is thinking about the big why behind your work, right? I don't know if you know the work of Simon Sinek. He's written a bunch of books and is certainly very popular. And there's a TED Talk called Starts With Why that is based on this very simple principle. And I'll try to explain it best I can. I'd encourage you to look for it because it's a good watch and a good read. And he likes to premise that everybody knows what they do. They can describe the things that happen. So if you run a theater company in a small town, you know what the productions are going to be this year and maybe next year. Sometimes it's very easy to describe how you do it, who you hire, who your actors are, where you source talent, where things take place. But very few organizations, in my experience, and maybe yours, can articulate the why of their being. What is the core purpose for which we do this work in theater? Is it to help our community understand its core essence themselves? Is it so that we see ourselves in a new light? The clarity of why is going to be the thing you're going to need to hang on to here, right? If you can articulate why you do what you do, then you have a better chance of being able to adjust the what and the how of what you do in order to deal with current circumstances where we can't do things the way we've always done them, right? When you aren't clear about this why, this core statement of purpose, this essence, it's really easy to stray, especially now, right? We want to avoid a scenario like this, where potentially a funder asks you your mission and your answer becomes it's whatever you want it to be because I want to have the funding that you need. So even in a moment where we're thinking about fundraising, we can't stray from the core of who we are, the core of what we care about. Or arts organizations are not baseball teams. We are not human service organizations. But that doesn't mean we should be absent right now. When we are clear with the why of what we do, we can think about how then we carry that out in a way that engages our community meaningfully and relevantly. An example of this from Chicago, where I live, is the Chicago Shakespeare Theater. Now, this is a big organization, I will grant you, and I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, they're really big. You know, I can't do what they do. But think about what they're doing here. They certainly are moving their education programs online, like many of us are doing. They're doing work to help artists and theater and those who make theater stay supported during this scary time. But they're also looking at their why, which is about connecting with community, and realizing that they have a costume shop and they could make masks. And those masks could go to help serve a community need. They're stepping up without straying from their essence. They're thinking about really engaging in their community in a time when it's harder for them to do what they would typically do on the stage. I know so many of you, I'm sure, receive support from the IAC, and they talk about community engagement in all of their programs, and this is what they're talking about. What does the community need, and how can you help fill that need authentically and with some expertise? What can you do? And it requires sticking to your mission. So that's principle number one, stick to your mission. What's principle number two at this time of fundraising, right? The fundraising scariness. You got to think about a shift from thinking about transactions to relationships. Now, what do I mean here? Let's start with what I don't mean. Transactions are not bad, right? In fact, they are important. We need people to buy tickets to our events, certainly. We need people to show up to the spring fundraising lunch. And I bet each of you listening can think of a set of regulars, the people who come to your stuff. Whatever your stuff is, no matter what, they will always come, right? And maybe your relationship with them has been more about a transaction. You do a thing and they give you some money. I'm on the board of the Old Town School of Folk Music here in Chicago, and we have this very, very same issue. And how I'm going to couch this shift from transaction to relationships is thinking about getting to know your regulars. The Old Town School is known for group music classes, and there are people, hundreds of people, who have taken the same group music lesson with the same set of people for literally years and years and years. They pay for it every 8 weeks. They show up, they play their guitar. It's become part of their community. And I think for the longest time, we at the Old Town School saw those folks in the context of the one thing that they did. They bought a lesson. They bought a group class. but we weren't thinking of them as stakeholders for our institution. And when we started thinking about the regulars, the people who are showing up with their money and transacting with us all the time, when we started thinking about them as stakeholders who actually cared about the future of the organization, and when we started engaging them in conversation about that, it was amazing what started to happen. The organization launched a COVID-19 relief fund not long ago to help support some of the freelance artists and teachers who work in the school. And this group of really dedicated regulars took that ball and ran with it, and were able to raise tens of thousands of dollars in small contributions that would then support the music making that they care about, but in a way that showed the kind of stakeholder that they were. Now, we didn't go to them and just say, here's another transaction. We went to them and said, do you care about the future of the school? Do you care about what's happening here? How can you step up and help? When you start thinking differently about stakeholders you're building relationships with, and your regulars are your stakeholders, you start thinking differently and things start to happen differently for you. I would put the transactional versus relational sort of fundraising stuff in these couple of columns, right? You're not thinking about things that are short-term gains or just an exchange of goods and services, something that may not require a lot of contact. You're thinking about something that has a longer-term responsibility, that has a longer-term payoff. You're thinking about keeping those regulars close. I would encourage you to be thinking right now, if I have regulars who buy tickets to stuff and they can't come to any stuff right now, how am I connecting with them? How am I deepening my relationship with that regular, that person who has showed me that they care about what we do by virtue of how often they've attended our events? And try to continue to deepen that relationship, to retain them, to think about a more high-touch, donor-focused sort of moment. How actually to do this? Well, these are just a couple of ideas, and I'd love to hear yours, and use the chat box for this, certainly. Okay, maybe you can't buy a ticket to an event right now, but gosh, couldn't you pick up the phone and call someone and thank them for their support in the past and ask them how they're doing and tell them what you're doing? Wouldn't this be a great thing for board members to do right now? Make thank you calls? Those are not so hard, right? What if you started social media groups just for past attendees of very specific events, people who care about X or Y or Z? What about putting together some sort of a simple electronic newsletter that includes some video clips that's, again, about deepening relationships? All of these things, my colleagues in the symphony orchestra world call this surprise and delight. What can you do to make the folks in your midst feel more connected to you right now? Deepen that relationship, move beyond just the financial transaction, and think about the ways to engage those regulars even now. Okay, so you're going to stick to your mission. You're going to think about relationships more than transactions. What's the final principle? This is a moment to leverage the existing relationships that you have. This is not a moment to try to find lots and lots and lots of new people to help you, or to hope that there's a savior, someone that you've never connected with yet. The folks at CCS Fundraising, which is a national consulting firm, just put out a report a couple of days ago. They surveyed about 1,000 organizations around the country and asked what people are doing. And what you're going to see is that people are doubling down on building and growing the relationships with the donors they already have. Board members, major givers, annual fund, regular givers, et cetera, et cetera. It's always tempting, particularly at a time like this, to think that there's a big institution out there who might ride to the rescue, right? I'm sure somebody, because it's the state of Indiana, somebody has said in a meeting that you've been to, gosh, who knows somebody at Lilly? Maybe Lilly will help us. Maybe Lilly will help bail us out. And while Lilly is a very significantly generous organization, I need you to remember something that's rooted in data. And this comes from Giving USA, which is a product of the Lilly School. Most of the money given to organizations, most of the philanthropic money in this country is given by people, not necessarily by institutions, right? Not certainly by corporations. When you're thinking about how to get started with fundraising, when you're thinking about doubling down and leveraging the relationships that you have, yes, of course you want to have a strong relationship with your community foundation, with those who've been with you, but you also want to remember that it's people who are really going to be helpful here, right? It starts with the people you already know, particularly right now. So you need a systematic way of thinking about who those people are. And I'm sure you've all seen a version of this. This is from Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, which is the textbook that I teach from. But I think this is a nice diagram that sort of says, okay, if we're leveraging existing relationships, where do we start? You start in the center. You start with your board, you start with your major donors, you start with your volunteers, you start with your general donors, right? This is not a moment to be thinking about a blanket annual fund appeal that goes to everybody in your zip code, right? This is a moment to really think about who are your most likely prospects, who are those key stakeholders where we were talking about when we talked about transactional versus relational, and work your way out. And make sure that as you're doing this, you can answer all of these 3 simple questions. How are we linked to the donor? This is somebody that we know well, who's our linkage? Do we know what this donor's ability is? And right now that might be harder to know just because things have been volatile, but you have a sense of it, right? And does this donor care about what we do? Even the most financially able prospective donor is not going to make a gift to an organization that they're not interested in. If you can answer these linkage, ability, and interest questions for the donors that are at the center of your constituency model, and if you really concentrate about asking those folks first to step up, to tell them, here's what we're doing in light of the situation, here's where we need your help, that's going to be hopefully the most fertile ground for your fundraising efforts. Now remember, if we look here for a minute, I'm going to go backwards. Look where your board is here. This is a really important moment for your board. This is an important moment for your board to take a lead role in fundraising. And I know that that's scary territory for a lot of board members, absolutely. But it's where that your board can be most helpful right now, personally connecting with the folks who are in the center of those concentric circles. And I know Bill's going to talk more about that. So those are my principles. Stick to your mission, make sure you know your essence, think about relationships and stakeholders, not transactions, work with those you know. It sounds kind of simple, but as my colleague Tim Seiler likes to say, fundraising is simple, it's just not easy. I'm not suggesting this is easy work, but I think if you keep those basics in front of you, you'll be okay. I'll leave this last slide up. Sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. Now I'm going the right direction. There's my contact information for any of you who are interested, and the folks at the IC know how to track me down as well. I'm also on O'Neill's website. If you have questions, comments, things after today that you just really want to have a chat, I hope you'll reach out because I'm always happy to help whenever I can. And with that, let me turn it over to Bill to take the Community Foundation side of this story, and I will stop sharing my screen so that we can see Bill's slides.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you, good, thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much, Karen. Very good information, and I absolutely love the transactional versus relational, and that's so important during this time, changing the conversation with donors. My name is Bill Barnes, and I have had the pleasure for the last 10 years of working for the Community Foundation in lovely Madison. I absolutely love what I do. But before I came to Madison, I spent many years in the corporate world, and most of that time I was a volunteer for nonprofit organizations. I probably served on a dozen nonprofit boards, chaired fundraisers, been involved in all kinds of things. So when I talk about board members being involved, I was that board member, and maybe that's why I kept getting asked to join other boards. I don't know. But anyway, as we think about what we have to do during this time, we hear about unprecedented times, and certainly this requires an unprecedented response. I'm going to start off with the next slide here. I'm going to start off with board member engagement, and these are some broader concepts. And you're going to hear, I mean, there's objections that board members have, concerns, whether they say it or not. This is on the mind of board members when you talk to them about fundraising. Some of you may have all board, no staff at all, but this is more aligned with maybe small staff and a board. Again, all hands on deck moment. Sometimes you hear board members say, oh, it's the staff's job to raise money, and the staff says, oh, why doesn't my board help? This is not the time for that debate. This is really everyone's job. In fact, board members do have that fiduciary responsibility. I've had people say to me, you know, this is a tough time right now. Should we even be raising money? Well, if you don't have to, that's great, but most people are going to have to. So I think it's important as you have conversations to start off with donors and acknowledge that there's a health crisis and an economic crisis, but transition into it. Something along the lines are, hey, we know people are hurting, people are without work. And as our community reopens, those arts and culture programmings and events are so important to healing and recovering, and they're good for the soul of the community, and they bring a sense of normalcy. And that is absolutely true, but you can tie those two together. I know that board members are concerned sometimes about having these conversations because they don't think that they know enough about the organization. Hey, I'm not an expert. I can't tell you how many people come to our shows, and that really doesn't matter. I am telling you that how you feel as a board member is so much more important than what you know. I've had so many people tell me, gosh, Bill, I don't know that much about this or that, but I can tell you do, and you care about it. So passion and sincerity go so far with donors. As long as you have a basic elevator speech that you've given board members, they'll be okay. The other thing is that I can't tell you how many people, especially even when you're asking people to join our board, they'll say, well, I don't want to twist people's arm for money. I don't want to beg for money. Well, I think I've been successful as a volunteer because when I joined a board, I genuinely care about the mission. And so when I do raise money, I don't see it as that. I see it as giving people an opportunity to support what I care about. I'm owning it, I care about it, and I'm just giving people the opportunity. I know that sounds very fuzzy and lovely and all that. It totally works because in my head, I'm convinced that's what I'm doing. So next slide, please. These are just things that every board member can do. We know as a grant maker that people give their time. We know that, but we want to see investment from a board. So if whether you're staff or board, and 100% of the board has to give, because that gives you credibility. Before you go out and ask, you're saying 100% of our board supports our mission, but that's not enough. We need more, not just the time. To be successful, you want to pull your volunteers into your fundraising plan. We know events are going to be canceled, performances are going to be canceled. The plan can't be, well, we're going to ask a community foundation or foundation for all the money and make us whole. You're going to need a plan to roll out. And it's so important for the message that you have and how you implement that plan to have your volunteers involved in it, and board members can be involved. I think one of the most effective things when you do an appeal, whether it's a letter, particularly a letter, to have board members at the bottom of that letter. You're going to personalize it, dear Bill, and then the body of it. But at the very bottom of it, to have someone who has a relationship with that individual board member, just write a brief note at the bottom. It's so important that they know it really, really works. Follow-up is huge. Follow-up is important. So many people do a mailing campaign or email or something like that and hope that money just rolls in. And just the simple step of following up with people can pay big dividends. I am telling you, it does work. There are people that I know that refuse to give a penny if they get something in the mail. All you have to do is follow up, and then they'll know that it matters, and they will give. Prompt thank you calls from donors. Donors that don't want, they just are so adamant that they do not want to be in the business of asking for money, they can just make a thank you call. It's super powerful. Google thank you calls from board members, and you will see that there are studies and statistics around increased giving, frequency of giving. It's a simple thing. And usually when board members call, I think the donor feels like they're going to ask them something. And it's so amazing when the person on the other end of the call realizes you're just calling to thank them. It's super powerful. And then staff, please, or whoever's doing the thank you letters, gift receipts, please be prompt with that. I can't tell you, I've had plenty of people tell me that they've stopped giving to an organization because they didn't get a thank you. And that's kind of shocking, but that actually does happen. Next slide, please. Now, for a lot of organizations, they're just trying to keep their doors open and pay their bills. Again, as Karen mentioned, that transactional side of it, you're not having shows or performances. Maybe you take in fees to go visit a museum and you're not able to do that. So you have operating costs that have to be covered. If you don't, great, but this is more along those lines. Individuals are a source, of course, as Karen put in her slide, huge percentage are individuals. Most likely you have some sort of friends group or you're an appeal. What I'm suggesting is move that way up, move that up to the summer. Remember, who just got, I mean, a whole bunch of Americans just got stimulus checks. I have been contacted by people that say, you know, Bill, I'm lucky enough to have a job. I want to help out. So, you know, that's something, just move it up in the calendar. Again, what Karen pointed out, you're going to get a deeper relationship when you're just talking to them about your mission and saying, we need help now. Businesses, remember, the businesses that sponsor tables or buy tickets or do whatever on an annual basis for you, they probably still have that budgeted, right? Unless they have crashed and are in terrible economic dire straits, they would probably just go ahead and make that grant to you, or that should say grant, the donation to you. So if they give $1,000 to sponsor an event, they've probably got that budgeted. I talked to them about receiving that money. Don't be bashful about that. United Ways, I just want to point out that the United Ways in Indiana are receiving money via a grant from Lilly Endowment Inc. to Indiana United Ways and trickling down to the county level. I'd encourage you to contact the United Way in your county, whoever serves your county. Private foundations and community foundations, for sake of time, I'm going to lump those together. We are accustomed to project funding, program, new initiatives, capital type things. That's in a normal world. All bets are off now, right? We understand that people need help just surviving. So it does not hurt just to contact, if there's a private foundation that funds the arts, ask them if they'll just give you an operating grant, and chances are they will. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of insight, if you're not familiar with community foundations, I wanted to give you a little behind the scenes kind of look. You know, we have this first category, we call them unrestricted grants. And unrestricted funds come, they usually are from, you see them during competitive grant cycles or disaster relief. We have flexibility to use them in a variety of ways. If you've received a competitive grant from a community foundation recently and your project or program is going to be stalled or maybe even canceled this year, contact the community foundation and see if they would let you change the purpose of that to operate. I know we did that with our local Arts Alliance, and I think everyone is happy as a result of that. Community foundations have these things called field of interest funds. Field of interest funds are for the environment, education, arts. So you might, if you're not too familiar with the community foundation, you might want to see on their list of funds if they have field of interest funds for the arts and what they plan on doing with those. Another type of fund are designated or agency funds. If you have one of these for your organization, you already know about them. You automatically get grants every year from these endowments. So I'm just kind of scoot over that one. Where there is opportunity, I believe, are donor advised funds. Now, donor advised funds exist with Fidelity and Schwab and big financial institutions, but they're also right in your backyard with your community foundations. So what I would do is, let me take a step back. These are funds where the donor advises the community foundation on how those grants are used, what speaks to them. A lot of people right now are thinking basic needs. They're thinking about response. You know, are people in need? Do they need food? Do they need shelter? Help with whatever? You know, we're transitioning into more of the recovery. Things are going to start opening, hopefully. And so you might want to look at your list of past grants from the community foundation and see if there's a family name tied to that. If you're not too familiar with this, then go to the community foundation's website, because there's going to be a list of donor advised funds, most likely. You may see people you know. You may say, boy, you know, I know that couple is, they support performances, and maybe they would support our theater group or something along those lines. So there's probably a relationship someone on the board has with these folks, and I would look into the donor advised funds. Next slide, please. Now we're kind of looking down the road a little bit. I think it's important to. In disaster preparedness, there are these terms: response, recovery, and resiliency. So while we're in the thick of this right now, I think resiliency and learning from today and the lessons around, maybe not having a rainy day fund. And I think we can learn about, how do we want to be better prepared next time? And I think that looks like, finding new ways to get donations. So there are just a few things that the vast majority of organizations I know do not really get into these things. And I'm telling you, it will make a lot of difference in the future for your nonprofit. Stock donations it's super simple to set up a stock gift program. Very, very easy. Our average stock gift at the community foundation is probably around 10 to 20,000 or something along those lines. So it's not small. Very simple to set up. And why it's attractive is that the people that have held this a long time, they don't have to pay capital gains when they give it to a 501c3 charitable organization. It's a sweet deal for them. IRA rollovers. If someone is 70 and a half and they have an individual retirement account and they have to take a distribution and they don't want to because they're going to get hit with the income tax, they can direct that to a charitable organization and avoid that. And we get probably 6 or 8 of these a year. They're never under $1,000. They're always pretty decent. Monthly giving. You can have your donors set up giving through automated clearinghouse, ACH, or credit card. And this is how I give to the Community Foundation and Rotary International, and it's super convenient. Estate plans. I'm going to finish with the big one that can be a game changer for your organization. It is simple and fast for donors to set up beneficiary forms, whether it's a life insurance policy, their 401k, or retirement plans, investment accounts. It's really not difficult to do. Of course, donors can also name you in their will a certain percentage of their estate or cash. But there is no excuse, in my mind, for every nonprofit to just start promoting the idea of this. And I just have a very simple example. At the bottom of your emails or in everything that you produce, simply say, please remember, I love Andy Griffith's show, so I'm going with Mayberry Arts. Please remember us in your will and estate plan. That can start the conversation. That will make you far healthier in the future. You may receive a large donation and be able to turn to that during tough, troubling times. So thank you for listening, and I'll see if there's any questions in the chat.
Great, thank you, Bill. And folks, go ahead and put your questions in the chat box, and then we do have a couple so that we can loft out that people have asked. Specifically, one of the questions was, how do you fundraise when people are angry at decisions made by your board to cancel an event? Either of you want to tackle that? Maybe Karen?
Yeah, well, that's not an easy question to have a concrete answer to. I think if your stakeholders are angry, you got to ask yourself why. Is it simply they're disappointed that they didn't get to go to an event? How was the communication handled? Did they feel like stakeholders, or did they feel like this was done to them in a more transactional way? When I find that folks are angry, I find you've got to unpack that a little bit and try to understand the why behind the anger. Right now, everything is so conflated. We're all more anxious than usual. Everything is uncertain, which I think leads to some of that. If you find that you have donors who are angry about decisions your board has made, I would encourage you to try to at least extend the olive branch and keep the relationship warm. Explain to them why you made the decisions you made. Listen to them when they say they're unhappy, and keep coming back. Maybe now's not the right time, but maybe 6 months from now it'll be the right time. Maybe a year from now it'll be the right time. I wouldn't assume that all donors are angry. Maybe you have 20 letters on your desk from angry donors, in which case it's very real for you, the person answering the question, asking the question. But I think that combination of clear communication, open-minded listening, and then the ability to say, I hope we can come and talk to you about this again in the future, knowing that you're just not going to keep everybody. Bill, what would you add to that?
I think you're absolutely right. I don't know the context of it. If it's someone that bought a season pass and they're missing out, certainly you could refund those things. But I think you had a great answer, Karen.
Great, thank you. Another question is, what is the best tactic for fundraising right now? Specifically, the person asked solicitation calls, a mailed campaign, a virtual event, a combination. Do we have a sense of what might be the best route to go at this time?
I would love to take that one.
Okay, great.
Is that okay? What I would start off, Karen referred to these as regulars. I call them friends and family. They're the people that sort of like unconditionally love what you're doing. And that would be my test group. I would certainly come up with a plan, again, some messaging around it. And then I would contact them. I would contact them by phone and have a conversation with them and say, you know, and if it's just operating that you need, I mean, you're just trying to survive right now, then have a very authentic, genuine conversation. You know, just let them know that it's important that you survive this, so then you can bring programming later in the year. But that's the safe, I think, a safe test group, whether it's 24 or however many people. But that's what I would do.
And I would just build on that, because I think that's exactly right. I would build on that by saying, remember, fundraising isn't about you, it's about your donor. So when you think about what channel to use, whether it's a mail appeal or a phone call or a virtual event, think about your donor, think about what they care about, think about how they connect with you, and that will help guide the strategy of what the things are that you try. I think successful fundraising right now involves trying lots of things, seeing what works, and being really willing to pivot quickly when something isn't working and move things forward.
Great, thank you. What indicators can we look for to determine when it is appropriate to raise funds for like non-COVID cause?
Well, I guess I'll start that, and it pivots on something that Bill said in his presentation. I don't think this is a time to apologize for asking for funds to support the arts. You know, I don't think that's true. Yes, there are needs in our community around hungry people and people who don't have shelter and people who don't have the health care that they need. And those things are important to all of us. But if you think of philanthropy as that intersection between what a donor cares about and what you do, don't you want to give them the opportunity to support you right now? Maybe you're not going to go forward with a bazillion-dollar capital campaign right at this particular moment, but to go to the people, the friends and family that Bill was just saying, and come to them now and say, here's what we're doing and we need your help and we hope you'll be with us while we work through this issue. I don't think it's a question of saying, when is it okay for us to send that appeal? I think it's a question of saying, who are our donors and how do we keep engaging them in what we're doing? So I'll say that.
No, that's great.
Good.
Very good.
There was one question, just sort of generally, not COVID related necessarily, but the question is, should board members be required to be a member and give to the annual fund? How much is it okay to require of your board members when they're joining?
Well, I don't know what you mean, be a member of the board and give to the annual fund, but we require, and I think everyone that serves on a board, while they're giving their time, they should make some contribution. There are grant applications through whether it's a community foundation or other organizations that will ask that question. And I am telling you, if it's not 100%, you risk not getting it, or you may, but it's not a good chance. If they're asking that question, 100% is the only acceptable answer.
Yeah, a colleague of mine, Lowell Notaboom from Minneapolis, does a lot of work about boards and governance, and he's like Bill, a board member, a super board member who's been around a lot of boards. And he says there are two good rules of board governance. And the first rule is make expectations plain. And the second rule is see rule number 1, right? You've got to be clear with your expectations of board members. It is okay to expect things. Don't be apologetic. Tell them what you need them to do. If what you need them to do is make a financial contribution that includes membership and annual fund and go to the farmer's market, as I see in the chat here, say it out loud, expect it, and those who are truly committed and passionate about your mission will step up to what you expect, right? I think Bill is absolutely right in the way he couched that, and it's okay to ask for things. It really is.
Do you think maybe right now is a good time to go on or focus on planned giving since, you know, plan giving can help ensure the longevity of an organization?
Well, I think that there's I don't think you have to start off just having a conversation with everyone. I think you can do it in a way where, like I said, you're just making mention of it. Everything that you send out, every letter that you send out, thank you, put that in the bottom. You may have just an insert so it can be it doesn't have to be super active and personal right now, just to start promoting it. You could have a post on Facebook about plan giving. I think it's taking people that are regular or larger donors that you have. There's steps in fundraising, right? There's getting someone to donate, then become a regular donor, then a major donor, and then from major donor, plan gift. Now, there are people that jump that, but that's typically how it looks. So people that give annually and in generous amounts, it doesn't hurt to maybe send them a letter if you're not comfortable, and just say, we know that you support what we do. If you'd like to have a conversation about ways that you can continue to give to our organization, even after you're no longer with us, I'd love to have that talk.
And I do think the idea of putting it everywhere, and even in email appeals, why not? Why not include a simple sentence that says, talk to us about how you can remember Mayberry Playhouse in your will, right? Particularly for donors who may feel less wealthy right at this moment, or there's uncertainty in their worlds, maybe somebody lost a job or whatever it happens to be, but they still love you and they still want to support you. Giving them the opportunity of saying, okay, maybe now is not the right moment for you to make a big cash gift, but you can still help us by setting up this long-term expectation through a planned gift. So the more you can just make people aware that they can be helpful to you in different kinds of ways, I think the better off you'll be.
And I think if I could just jump in, one other thing is that it's really easy to find all this information about plan giving and ways people give. The first thing that I would do is I would print that stuff off, I'd share it at a board meeting and have that conversation. And perhaps the very first person that does that is someone on your board.
Good. So I want to follow up on a previous question about how would you message your decision to cancel an arts event that preserves the relationship with audiences and donors as much as possible?
I'll start with that one. I think that a key piece of the messaging is understanding what you're able to do. Are you financially able to refund money? If you are, that message becomes a little bit different. If you are not, you need to think about that really carefully. And I know that there are some organizations for whom the idea of trying to refund season subscriptions is just not financially feasible. So I would make sure that you and your board have a real conversation about, okay, what can we actually do? And then what's the next step? I think messages to donors right now need to be as clear and transparent and honest as possible. This is not a moment for happy talk. Look how fabulous everything is. Oh, by the way, we need your help. This was a hard decision. This is how we made the decision in the interest of public health and following the guidance from our state. We don't like to do this. We like to be together, but we hope you understand. Here are your options if you're in a refund place, and lean into, here's what we're still doing. No, we're not doing the concert on the stage, but we are doing music lessons for kids online. We are doing whatever the things are. Even if to you they seem small, they don't seem like you're doing very much, I guarantee you the activity will be important for your donors to hear about. So I think clarity, being concise, being transparent, and talking not just about how you made the decision, but where you're going, I think all of that is important.
Do you think it's important to have like an entryway program to a certain degree that is responding to the needs of the community at this time, like your example with the theater and making the masks? We have the Children's Museum in Muncie is wanting to do like at home art kits, but it seemed like that would be a good entryway. We would love your help. This is one way we are responding. Is that like a tactic you think would be a good way to go?
I think anytime that you're sticking with the essence of who you are and talking about how you can respond to this current moment is something that your donors are going to want to hear about. And you don't want to duplicate services that are already happening in communities, right? But if you can think about how you're unique and how you might be able to say, while we can't do this, but we can do this, and here's what and how, I think that will certainly be something that your donors think about.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you, guys. I don't see any other burning questions in the chat box, so folks feel free to add them in last minute. We can always forward them to our experts down the road. Thank you guys so much. And then I'm going to pitch it back over to Bridget, who will close us out for the day. We really, really appreciate all of your expertise. I know how hard it is right now for people to muck through this, and fundraising is so valuable. Bridget?
Thank you so much, Paige. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon to be with us. I'd like to take a moment to thank Karen and Bill for taking the time to be with us today as well. And like I said, everybody who joined us, we will be sharing out a recording and resources tomorrow afternoon. The slide decks that both of our presenters share will be in that, as well as their contact information, so you can send any personal questions to them that you have. I'd like to go ahead and invite you to join us tomorrow. We are hosting our third webinar this week. We are just going for it. This one will be one that I think most everybody has on their minds: how to reopen. So tomorrow it's going to be From the Field, Reopening Plans and Best Practices. It will be at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and we will be over on Facebook live streaming that. If you have any questions for the panel that you'd like to submit in advance, please go ahead and register at www.in.gov. We look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. And if we don't see you tomorrow, I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye.